Welcome back to the show. I'm going to let you guys in on a little treat because Dana and I are talking about our dogs and how they're being dogs.
Yep.
I'll just say, right? Okay.
Yep.
And Dana's beautiful mind went from acorns to chestnuts on a ground to thinking about the Christmas song of roasting chestnuts in an open fire and her thinking maybe I should try. That happened in a span of 1.2 seconds.
And then I'm like, but I don't know if I know how to cook them. I've never had a chestnut roasted. Would I like them? Would it be worth the work? Maybe I should Google it and see are the chestnuts that fall off some tree in my neighborhood the same ones they're talking about in the song? People eat chestnuts? They're toxic to dogs, but can I eat? I mean, yeah, just on and on and on.
I am working on a project, and Dana's on the advisory board. And the designer, I've only committed to having neurodivergent people on this team. Okay. Because it's for neurodivergent people. So anyway, and she said to me, well, I didn't get this done, and I was supposed to, but I went down a rabbit hole of learning about spiders. And I know everything about spiders and I'm scared of them. So I thought maybe if I learn about them, maybe I won't be scared of them. And I saw a spider, so I thought that's a good time to learn about them. And I spent the whole day learning about them. I can tell you all about them, and I'm still scared and I didn't get any work done.
Yeah.
That's what she said. That was like, I'm sorry about that deadline. Here's what happened.
And that's like an ADHDer's life.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
I thank God every day that I'm only autistic and not ADHD as well, because people I know that are both, the pain is real, man. It's real. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But segueing into our topic, I think this does kind of segue, because when you and I were talking, sort of hurling things that our dogs try to eat or do eat, succeed in eating that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Gwen and I have a really good reciprocity, and we do. Thank you for the listener who said it's hard because sometimes you talk over each other. We do. I think we both try really hard not to like shout over each other. We'll stop. But part of when conversational reciprocity, we mean like you say something and then I say something, and you say something and I say something, and you wait for the other person to finish before you say what you're going to say. We as autistics get marginalized as you don't get that. I do get it. It's that I get so many ideas flowing at me as we're talking that I got to get them out. Now, what I've had to learn to do is maybe not all of these have to come out. So I'm learning to be like, do I need to? And Gwen and I have fun talking about these details. But if I were just like talking to some random person in line at Starbucks, I wouldn't have given them all of that story. I would have just been like, oh yeah, we're having a hard time with our dog picking up acorns and eating stuff that she shouldn't. It probably would have stopped there, right? But at a point in my life, I would have just been going. And then they'd be looking at me like, why is this person telling me all this? Before I knew I was autistic, once I learned about conversational reciprocity, I was like, oh. And my family did do the yelling over each other. Like if you wanted to get a word in edgewise, you had to get louder. It's like, the German, Polish, Midwest, that's what you do. You want to be heard, you got to fight for it, right? So there was that on top of it. But I've had to learn to chill it a bit, right? And wait a little bit. Or if I do get really excited about something, figuring out a way to bookmark it. If I'm in a meeting for work or something and I have an idea, now I'll write it down on a notepad or on my computer or whatever so I can go back to it. What's interesting though is 9 times out of 10 when I go back to it, I don't need to talk about it anymore. I was like, okay, so that was a superfluous piece of information. But coming back to it, I've had to work with this, and my wife and I have worked on it together, because sometimes I will jump to a meaning making that I think she's going to go to and like try to finish her sentence. And then sometimes she'll say, no, just like this. No, that's not what I was going to say. And now that we've talked about it, I'm like, oh crap, there, I did it. When she first started saying that to me before I knew I was autistic, I just felt ashamed and judged, and like I did when I was a kid. Like, just, I got accused of having diarrhea of the mouth. That was my mom's favorite, phrase for talking too much. It was okay when she did it, but not when anybody else did it. But that sense of excitement around what's coming and kind of wanting to predict that. But it's okay to, and she'll say, now she'll just say, hang on. And that's the cue for me to be like, oh, okay, I need to give her more time. And now that I know that I have a cue that I can honor, I actually sort of like when she says that. I would rather have her say, hang on, than me, blah, 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 and then she have to wait and say, are you done? And then do her thing, right? So that goes back to, people in your life figuring out a way to flag you when you're doing it that doesn't feel abrupt and jolting and nasty. But we sort of do get reciprocity. We understand there's a give and take. We don't want to dominate the whole thing, but the string of thoughts is so fast and rapid, we don't want to necessarily lose it. But there is a skill in figuring out, what should I talk about in this audience or not, right? So that's one piece of it, the flooding thoughts. The other piece of it is sometimes folks, if they have alexithymia and they don't really know how to say what they're saying in a concise, like straightforward way, and maybe there's a lot of details and they're figuring out as they go, can be really irritating to the other person, because you're like, okay, we're going on 10 minutes now. When are you going to get to the point, right? If you know that that's your conversational style, you might even be able to do that in your head a little bit, or say to the person, bear with me. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this, but if you can stick with me, I know I'll get there. My neurodivergent students in class, when they're making a point about something, I know they're neurodivergent, and I just wait. That's okay. I can see some other people maybe getting a little restless about it, but I'm like, that's a different processing style, and I want to model honoring that. And we usually get some really cool stuff out of it that we wouldn't have if the person went from A to Z. God, that LMNOP part was awesome, right? So you have to, again, we keep coming up against this barrier of, what is a neurotypical way of being in the world, and do you have to modify yourself to fit into that? The unfortunate answer is, to a degree, if you want people to not think everything you do is a pain in the ass. But at the same time, learning how you operate on the inside, then you've got that efficacy we always talk about, right? So if I know I'm just excited about something and I can actually stop myself in that moment, that feels kind of really good, because I'm like, oh, I have some control over this. It's not diarrhea of the mouth. It's just loose poop that I can hold on to that for a while, just to use that really visual analogy that you'll never forget again. It's slightly inappropriate, but you'll remember that one. Right? It really is like that, because sometimes it feels like the urge is so much, I can't not do it. And other times it feels good to know I can have control over that. And that's that efficacy piece. And I think that comes with time and practice. And if you're a little kid or even an adolescent, you're not there yet. It's going to take some time to learn those things. And that's a real learning curve. Right?
Yeah. This, as you're talking, this reminds me, or it brings me to the idea of urge control.
Yeah.
Right? And urge control, which is inhibition, that's another way we'll say that.
Yeah.
Really is housed in like the very, very frontal parts of our brain. And so we really don't come into the maturity, or those frontal lobes of our brain really don't come to full maturity until our mid to late 20s. Mm-hmm. And so we just see how difficult and why inhibition and urge control and seeing yourself and being able to have more self-control really is a later skill, right? It's really a skill that you develop maybe in your later 20s, maybe early 30s. And we just kind of know that if you have any differences in your learning, in your brain development, that's even like could be delayed by 5 years. Like we just kind of know that in the literature, right?
Yeah.
And so, this idea though of, again, we usually come back to what are like the big levers that we pull. self-awareness, intentionality, choice. These are the things that build empowerment and build agency and build efficacy. And that I think is really the antidote to feeling like you're at the mercy of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it can feel really jolting when you don't have control over that. And you certainly can't have control and decision and choice if you're not even aware of it. So absolutely.
Yeah.
As you were talking about the age of onset of that too, I was thinking, oh yeah, because I went back to undergrad in my mid-20s, and it was around the time that was really hitting my stride for me, whereas other folks might have hit it in their early 20s. It took me longer, and that sort of makes sense, right? How do I add to discussion without it just being like this, blah, blah, and then not, having anything else to say about it, right? But yeah, and when you were talking about it being that mostly that frontal lobe, evolutionarily, that was the last lobe to come along. And like animals don't have really hugely evolved animals that aren't as smart as us, if you will. Dolphins and whales and a lot of other animals have bigger frontal lobes. They can delay decision making. They can engage in planning a little bit more. But a lot of animals don't. It's like what's right in front of them at the time is what they're dealing with, right? And to me, it sort of felt like that when I was younger. It was whatever was happening in the moment, that was what I was dealing with. And as I aged a little bit, I got to expand that out a little bit. So this is why, like a little kid, a 3-year-old will just say what they're thinking. This is why the 2-year-old in the store will stare at you unmercifully, right? Even though you're like, you get taught at some point, don't stare, but they're just like this pure being of like, I'm staring at you. And then we learn not to do those things. So those things can be harder for a neurodivergent, but they're not inaccessible completely. And then again, letting people in your life know how are ways you can handle this. Like my wife saying, no, hang on. And then I'm like, that feels soft enough. And we've talked about it enough from her that I don't get shamed by it. And then I'm like, oh, and then we can go on from there. But that's taken some figuring out as well. And probably people I work with too probably know that intuitively as well. It seems to work out pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. The reciprocity, right? It's also, Dana, it's also not so I go, you go, I go, you go, I go, you go, I go, you go. And that there are also these communication markers that indicate that I'm attentive and engaged, right? The head nod, the ahas, the right? These things that also can overlap with someone else's communication, like, right? It's happening simultaneously. And so I think a lot of times when we're talking about communication or a conversation reciprocity and we go, I go, you go, I go, you go, I go, you go.
Yeah.
And we're that concrete. What happens with some of my clients is like,
is it my turn yet?
Frozen. Yeah, right. I'm frozen. And then you see this building of pressure.
Oh, God.
Right. And I can like hear like the low hum of the energy build. Like, and it's like, okay, let's back up and and so I do love that our audience feels okay to give us feedback though. I mean, it's helpful in that. I think Dana and I don't even realize it sometimes because we're just having a conversation we're truly engaged in and interested in.
Well, yeah, it's a lot more like actual volleyball, where when you hit the volleyball to the other side, sometimes it comes back with the first hit, sometimes it comes back with 2, sometimes a 3 is the max. It's supposed to be in volleyball. Sometimes it's a slam, sometimes it's a lob. That's what conversation reciprocity is more like in reality. And then trying to navigate that and figure that out. And when can I jump in there and when can't I? And then you're right. I think when you're talking about the intangibles, like the nonverbal stuff, I think that's why talking on the phone is so hard, because you're not getting the nod or necessarily the mm-hmm. I remember my therapist used to do the audible mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And at first it bugged me. So I'm like, why are you doing that? And then I'm like, oh no, this is actually really good because it's like telling me that she's listening. And I can adopt that as well. There's ways to acknowledge it that you're hearing someone, then jumping in and saying, oh yeah, and then adding to it, which we like to do too, because it's our way of saying, I feel the same way. Here's a story about me. It can be just like doing that, and like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then the person might say, it looks like you really understand this. Oh yeah, totally. Those skills are hard to juggle all at one time. And so starting out more concrete, I go, you go, I go, you go, and then making it more sophisticated as you go. I mean, those are the kinds of things they teach like in kindergarten, right? We're going to go around, everybody's going to get a turn. I do this in teaching group therapy. You can have it be organic, but for the beginning of group therapy, have it be there's no cross-talking or talking. Oh, everybody gets a turn if they want it. And then you open it up, right? And it is hard to see a bunch of burgeoning psychologists not be able to add stuff because they want to add stuff. And then they'll talk about what that feels like and restrained. And I'm like, yeah, welcome to my life every day of my life. Having to hold it in and not say anything, right? And technology helps that. Like you and I, when we're texting each other, sometimes I can tell that my response is like 3 comments ago. And you have enough experience with that you're like, which of my reactions belongs to which comment, especially if there's a lull. Whereas sometimes with my wife or other people are like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm like, oh, well, that was like 5 comments ago. I need to get that in there. So all those are real struggles, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I love the volleyball analogy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really do. It's really good, Dana.
It's so different in the same game. Can come at you all kinds of different ways. Yeah.
I absolutely, I think that's so helpful. Yeah. And so many times, I mean, this is the power of analogies, right? Mm-hmm. That it helps us understand something on a deeper level or a different way. And for like, that's really clarifying for me. I'm going to have to use it. I will asterisk it and be like, credit Dana Waters,
yeah.
Dr. Dana Waters.
The name of the episode can be Conversational Volleyball instead of Reciprocity.
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are just getting all the peeks into the way Dana and I work. Because the way Dana and I work, it's not linear. I'll tell you that much.
It's not linear. Yeah. Yeah.
It's wonderfully not linear.
If you're living with all linear people, they're going to have a hard time. My dad was an accountant, and he's so linear in his thinking, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, actually. Talking to him on the phone, because he lives in another state, I'll literally sometimes be sitting there biting my tongue like, don't say anything, Dana, let him finish. He needs to, because it's not going to go well if I derail him, and then we're going to have this. It's like I can just wait and then like wait till he's done and say, okay, regarding that, but that is not the way I normally communicate or do that. That feels really stilted and artificial to me, and would make me feel like I'm going to blow up like these kids you work with. So it's again, we come up against this, which is so much about what our podcast is about. It's not about making you neurotypical. It's about understanding yourself and figuring out a way for you to move through the world being as much true to who you really are as you can in every arena that you can, and knowing sometimes you can't. Right. Yeah.
And what to do in the times that you can't.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Because that is important.
I was driving to work today, coming up one of the streets in Seattle, and I noticed the traffic was a little blocked in this one spot, and there are literally 50 police motorcycles all parked in a row, and I was like, "What the hell is happening?" And no cops, just the motorcycles, and I was like, "Oh, it's election season. I bet someone's here." What I wanted to do was pull over and look for it, but I knew my wife would be on it already, so I just, without hands free, "Hey Siri, call Sue." And all I said was, "Is someone important visiting Seattle today?" And she said, "Oh yeah, Tim Walz is there." And I was like, that's all I need to know. But it was bugging me. Like if I didn't finish driving, not knowing what was going on, it would have bothered me. So these sort of workarounds you find, and that you're honoring the way your brain works and figuring out when you need to defer and when you can actually get safely, in this case, get an answer right away. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. You had to close your loop, Dana.
I needed to close the loop.
You had to close your loop, right?
Right. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with closing the loop if it's not harmful.
Right.
And I think that's the piece. Like, when does harm start? That's actually the it depends nuance piece for many people.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure.
So it's not don't do it, do it. It's do it until it doesn't work. What's that line? What's that threshold? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly. I knew she'd be on it, and if she didn't know, she'd look it up because she's at home in front of her computer. And she's like me. We say we're terriers. We want to know everything. Dig, 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 dig. I helped her with a paint job once where there were two terriers. I think they were Yorkshire terriers. The entire 8 hours we were there, one of them sat in front of this little vole hole, just staring at the hole. 8 hours. I mean, he got up and kind of peed and would come, but stared at that hole. And I'm like, that is a terrier mentality. And that, being autistic, I have a terrier in me that I can't just walk away from it sometimes. And other times I'm like, you know what? I've been here for 8 hours. Maybe I should go pee or have something to eat. Or, I think the vole is not coming back. It's okay to walk away. And those can be really hard decisions to make. Yeah. It helps to have a partner who's equally terrierish when it's, I wonder if, and if she doesn't know the answer, we're both on our phones trying to look it up. Right.
Yeah.
We need to close the loop. We need to know. Yeah.
Close the loop. And there's no harm.
No harm.
You knew not to do it while you were driving.
Exactly.
That's a great example. Yeah. So you call Sue and you offload it to the other person, to the other terrier to share the load to get it back to you.
Safe at home, can already knew actually. Yeah, I actually saw that in the paper. And my first thought, I said to her, yeah, I knew you'd know. And then she chuckled because it's like, yeah, this is great. Taking advantage of a trait she has that I just love. So, yeah.
Well, that's why you guys get along, right?
Yeah,
it's what works. So, all right, everyone. Again, I'm ending an episode and I'm blanking on where we started, but
conversational reciprocity.
I got it.
Volleyball.
I did. It took a moment. It took one moment because I was thinking about the terrier and the vole.
Yeah. Yep.
And then it brought me to Stanley and how someone said to me, you know that Springer Dana said this to me actually because I was inevitably complaining about something that Stanley did. And as we always talk about our net positive of our dogs and our pets. And she said, Gwen, Springer Spaniels are bred to track something and not let that go until it's done.
That's right. And in his case, busting into anything and everything to get at the food. Yeah.
Oh, he's so food motivated. I can't. Yeah. I again, like, why do I have child locks back on my house? Like, I've got a 16, almost 17-year-old teenager. Why?
Oh, yeah.
And why? This would be a funny picture. Why child locks and Star Wars umbrellas on my counters?
But it's a really good to tie it back to neurodivergence. A purebred dog is a dog that has been bred to have certain characteristics, right? And in a way, neurodivergents are similar. Our brains are hardwired to be a certain way, and we need to honor that and then find the workarounds rather than we can't change our brains, so we need to find the workarounds. Yep.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, we will see you in the next episode. Be good to you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.